This is 22 Hours, a Second Look. In the new content after this episode, we're back with Julia and Jack to talk about how the music for this podcast came together. A mic drop, if you ask me, that surprised a lot of listeners. We talk about how we wrote this podcast, how we got some of the audio, and I also bring in a surprise guest who adds a perspective that even Julie and Jack didn't know about. But first, here's episode 9, Brother versus Brother. Previously on 22 Hours, An American Nightmare.
Just like you had your hair in that room with those 3 dead people in that location, right?
No, man.
Your hair in the bed next to the bat you used to kill Amy and Sava Savopoulos. Isn't that right?
No, man.
I know Judy well enough to know that she takes her job so seriously that she would have had a very long conversation and told him the positives and the negatives about testifying.
You know that Daron Wint took the police to a location in that block and pointed out a pile of burned debris in that area. Is that right?
No, ma'am.
You didn't know it was coming directly from your brother?
It is being called a major crime scene as homicide investigators examine a house that caught fire in Northwest D.C.
The room is a crime scene.
They found 4 people, including a child, dead inside on the 2nd floor.
Right now, it does not appear that this was just a random crime.
I said, but what happened? They said, we don't know. They killed the whole family.
Police have said they believe more than one person is responsible for the crime.
A wide-reaching manhunt for Daron Wint, stretching all the way to New York City.
We had the DNA on a piece of crust. How did his DNA get into that house?
Got a package that I'm going to need you to bring down to me.
To do what he did to 4 people, including a 10-year-old boy, is just beyond words.
They were brutalized, and we saw the evidence of that.
The jury has just reached a verdict in the murder trial of Daron Wint.
He was going to strike the American dream just by committing murder and mayhem.
This is 22 Hours, An American Nightmare. After hearing Daron Wint testify in his own murder trial, you may be wondering how police tracked him down. His arrest is one of the most dramatic parts of this case. But to set it up, we actually have to go back to the night before, when the world first learned Daron Wint's name.
A suspect has been identified in the murders of 3 family members and their housekeeper in Northwest D.C. WTOP's Michelle Bash joins us live with details.
Yes, we're just getting this in from D.C. police tonight, and police are hoping you can help them find this suspect in connection with last week's murders.
On the night of May 20th, 6 days after first responders rushed to the Savopoulos' burning house and made the horrible discovery inside, D.C. police revealed the name of their suspect. This is a WTOP report from that night.
The suspect's name is 34-year-old Daron Dylan Wint. He's wanted for the murders that took place on Woodland Drive Northwest in the 3200 block last Thursday. He's described as a black male, 5'7" in height, weighing about 155 pounds. Again, his name is 34-year-old Daron Dylan Wint.
Reporters packed into a room at D.C. police headquarters the next morning, hoping to learn more information about the man police said was responsible.
We do believe that there is a connection between this suspect in this case through the business. So right now, it does not appear that this was just a random crime, but there is a connection through the business.
That's then D.C. Police Chief Kathy Lanier at a press conference on May 21st, 2015. She was referring to Daron Wint's connection to Sava's business, American Iron Works, where Daron worked 10 years earlier. Behind the chief during her press conference stood 2 blown-up pictures of Daron Wint, pulled from his Facebook page. In one photo, Daron looks serious. His long dreadlocks hanging over his chest. He's wearing jeans and a white T-shirt, and a large silver cross hangs from his neck. He's holding a cigarette down by his thigh. The other photo is different. Daron has a wide smile. He's leaning on someone who has been cropped out of the picture, but it's clear Daron has his arm around them. In that photo, Daron's wearing a blue tracksuit with a baseball cap on backwards. The night before that news conference, police raided the home of Daron's dad and stepmom in Lanham, Maryland, where Daron was living at the time, but Daron wasn't there. After searching the house and talking to Daron's family, police had a better idea of where to find him.
Information gained from interviews and new information in the past few hours, we believe Mr. Wint is currently in the Brooklyn, New York area. The task force is continuing to search for Mr. Wint. I have been in contact with the commissioner from the NYPD They have offered and are providing all assistance that we need in trying to locate Mr. Wint.
From obscurity to one of the most wanted men in America, Daron Wint was now a fugitive. And that news conference triggered a nationwide manhunt.
But now that puts you on alert for someone like myself. You coming into the newsroom, it's like, you just know. You're on the lookout for every arrest. You're on the lookout for police lights because you just don't know where it's going to come.
Later that night, May 21st, 2015, Washington Post reporter Clarence Williams was working his regular night shift when he got a call in the newsroom. After 20 years of working the beat, he says there's usually a lot of waiting around. But this call was urgent. It was from one of his sources about a possible arrest in Northeast D.C., something involving that guy everyone was looking for.
And it's one of those that you go out of an abundance of caution.
Clarence said he couldn't risk missing what could be the takedown and arrest of Daron Wint. But it had only been a day since police officially identified their suspect.
That idea of him suddenly being back in D.C. that fast, was stunning, frankly. And it just, you went from 0 to 60 because I really thought he wasn't in the area.
When Clarence arrived in Northeast D.C., the quiet neighborhood was already pulsing with red and blue police lights.
It was dark. It was before midnight, kind of in that 11:30-ish hour that I got out there. And, this stretch of Rhode Island Avenue it's really busy during the day, but at night it's virtually deserted.
It was clear to Clarence something big had happened. Behind the yellow tape, in the middle of the street, was a large box truck. Several feet behind that was a white sedan. All of the car doors were open, and the trunk was popped. But Clarence was stuck behind the perimeter, unable to cross the tape and get a better look.
I've got some really thick glasses that I've been wearing since I was 4 years old, and I'm nearly 50 now. So it's a lot of squinting your eyes and trying to see every little detail you can from a block away. And, and what's the make of that car? Is that a Chevy? And the light's bad. So is it white? Is it silver?
It was also clear to Clarence that whoever had been in those vehicles had already been carted away by police.
Again, with most things in this case, a lot of questions. What is going on? Who was where? Where was he sitting? Who was he with? Who was he traveling with? Why are they traveling with a truck, of all things? And what's inside the truck?
And the most important question.
Is the suspect in custody? Is Daron Wint identified?
Standing on the dim street corner, Clarence took out his phone and began working his sources in law enforcement. Eventually, he got D.C. Police Chief Kathy Lanier on the line. And she said the 3 words Clarence needed to run with the story. Just got him.
A wide-reaching manhunt for Daron Wint, stretching all the way to New York City, ended in the district. The 34-year-old was arrested in Northeast.
The Washington Post reports Wint was traveling with 2 women in a white Chevrolet Cruze. The other vehicle was a box truck with 2 men inside. Police pinned the vehicles at Rhode Island Avenue and 10th Street Northeast. They arrested Wint and took the others into custody. At least $10,000 were found in the truck.
The Washington Post had already broken the news that $40,000 had been delivered to the Sofopoulos home while the victims were being held captive. Was the money in the vehicles connected to the ransom?
And we just didn't know. We knew it was a large amount. We just didn't know specifically and whether it would match up to what, potentially could have happened inside the house.
Cash wasn't the only thing investigators found. They also found money orders in both vehicles. The search warrants filled out by officers on the scene also noted that inside the Chevy Cruze, there was a black and pink drawstring bag, clothing, and cell phones of the people riding inside. On the floor of the box truck, they found a crumpled up yellow piece of paper with an address, a phone number, and the word detective written on it. These little details didn't make it into anyone's reporting that night. Every story was about the dramatic arrest, which turned out to be far more complicated than U.S. Marshals had planned.
I'm Jamie Forzato in College Park, Maryland, where local police and federal marshals tracked Daron Wint to this Howard Johnson hotel off of Route 1.
It was a very fluid situation. We were planning on figuring out where he was in the hotel and then taking him down. When we were approaching, we realized he was in a vehicle.
Robert Fernandez, the commander of the Capital Area Regional Fugitive Task Force, says they followed 2 vehicles into the district.
That's a WTOP report from the motel. The arrest made national news, following a week of coverage of the murders and the manhunt for Daron Wint.
We try and draw a picture of relatives, locations where he's lived, friends, patterns of life.
ABC's 2020 spoke with the same commander, Robert Fernandez, about tracking Daron Wint to the Howard Johnson.
The U.S. Marshals advance team notices Wint leaving the hotel, but he isn't alone.
That advance team radioed to us. They had a suspicion that he was in one of two vehicles that were right over here.
In one of those vehicles, Wint and 3 women. In the other, Wint's younger brother Darrell and their cousin.
At that moment, both of those vehicles left and turned northbound.
Didn't see that coming.
Not at all. But we're ready to roll with it.
The U.S. Marshals began to follow the group. Traveling in a caravan, the box truck with North Carolina tags was followed by a white Chevy Cruze. They followed them for about 25 minutes, from the motel in Maryland over the D.C. line. As the caravan approached a red light, the U.S. Marshals deployed what Fernandez called a vehicle pin blocking maneuver. Law enforcement vehicles surrounded the box truck and the sedan on all sides, and on the commander's go, the police car in front of the caravan reversed. The back car sped up, and 4 others surrounded the truck and the sedan on their sides, pinning them in.
In the rear passenger seat of the white Chevy, Daron Wint, trapped.
He followed commands. He got out, he crawled, he got on the ground. He was immediately handcuffed and brought over to a police vehicle, and he didn't say a word.
What did you see?
In the truck, I saw in the side compartment of the passenger door, a big wad of cash, and it was $100 bills. You could tell it was hundreds.
Word quickly got out that Daron Wint's brother, Darrell, was one of the 2 men riding in the box truck. But who were these other people traveling with a known fugitive? Clarence Williams says he remembers dozens of questions swirling in his mind about what he'd just learned.
Probably the biggest mystery of all was, what was this truck about? Who travels in tandem with a large white truck? And you wonder, is it stacked with cash? And this wasn't a small van. This wasn't a pickup truck. This was the size of what you'd rent from U-Haul, or one of the storage, to move a small apartment. So what was in it? You're standing there and just wonder.
The fact that Daron was arrested with 5 other people seemed to give weight to the theory that several assailants took part in the crime. But after hours of questioning on the night of the arrest, every one of the 5 people detained with Daron Wint, including his brother Darrell, was let go. At the time, we didn't know who they were or what their role was, and we wouldn't know for years. Why Daron was with those people and why they were headed toward downtown D.C. the night he was arrested, that remained a mystery. As for Daron, he stayed behind bars, awaiting trial for years, and as far as we know, he reserved his right to remain silent. Once the arrest was over, and Daron Wint was in custody for the brutal killings of Sava, Amy, Philip Savopoulos, and Vera Figueroa, the national spotlight on the so-called mansion murders dimmed, and information on the case went silent. Getting answers to what seemed like basic questions about the night Daron was arrested, getting any information about the case itself, seemed like piercing an impenetrable wall, even for seasoned reporters like Clarence Williams.
I had more than one conversation, either with sources or, with colleagues, where I'd wondered, what else do they have? Do they have enough? Why is this taking so long? What else are we going to hear, and when are we going to hear?
3 years later, on the first day of his murder trial, the silence around this case was broken when his lawyers stood up inside courtroom 203 of D.C. Superior Court and proclaimed Daron's innocence, pointing the finger at his 2 younger brothers, Stefan and Darrell. Prosecutors Laura Bach and Chris Bruckman scoffed at the defense's allegations the crime was committed by Daron's brothers. They said Stefan and Darrell Wint had nothing to do with the horrible crime on Woodland Drive, and that Daron was trying to get away with murder. But because the defense built its case around the possibility of their involvement, the prosecution was basically forced into the role of defending Darrell and Stefan. They had to show the jurors Daron's story was a desperate lie, and that his 2 brothers were innocent. To do that, they'd have to tell the full story of what happened the night Daron Wint was arrested. And to do that, they'd end up calling brother to testify against brother. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with HelloFresh. It's soup season, people, and chili season, and I'm also into the quintessential fall veggies like squash and pumpkin. And if you're craving something warm and satisfying that comes with its own ingredients and recipe, look no further than HelloFresh. It's doubled its menu, which now offers more than 100 options a week, and they're offered in larger portions, so everyone is satisfied. Get high-protein or veggie-packed recipes, or you can get steak or seafood offered at no extra cost. Sometimes you just need a meal that you don't have to think about. You just grab it out of the fridge, and you've got dinner in 20 minutes. The best way to cook just got better. Go to HelloFresh.com/nightmares10FM now to get 10 free meals and a free item for life. One per box with active subscription. Free meals applied at discount on first box. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. That's HelloFresh.com/nightmares10FM to get 10 free meals and a free item for life. Darren's brother, Stefan Wint, took the stand on October 2nd. We called him multiple times to see if he wanted to tell his side of the story and be part of this podcast. And each time we spoke to him, he turned us down. He didn't have anything to add. He said he didn't want to be part of this madness. But his testimony during the trial fills in his part of the story. Stefan was not there the night Darren was arrested. He said he saw his brother's arrest on the news, just like everybody else. When Stefan testified, which was actually a few weeks before Darren took the stand, we learned the two hadn't always gotten along. Family members testified their personalities were always very different. In a way, Darren and Stefan seemed like a study in contrasts. Where Darren is brawny and average height, Stefan is tall and lanky. When he took the stand, Stefan wore khakis, a button-down shirt, and a sweater vest. Earlier, when their stepmother was asked in court to describe Stefan, she used the word geeky. Like Urkel, she said. And honestly, it seemed like a pretty accurate description. Stefan started his testimony with his backstory. He came from Guyana to the U.S. with Darren back in 2000. Stefan was 18 then, 1 year younger than Darren. 15 years later, at the time of the murders, Stefan was working for a construction company called PCM Services, which is based in Beltsville, Maryland. He'd worked for the company since he immigrated and settled in Maryland. By the spring of 2015, Stefan was a supervisor in the painting division. Over the years, as Stefan rose through the ranks at PCM, he tried helping his brother out. Around 2006 or 2007, he testified he'd hired Darren to be his helper. But it didn't work out, and ultimately Darren had to be let go. Still, Stefan said he continued to help Darren. He offered him a place to stay after Darren got kicked out of their sister Samantha's place. And in the spring of 2015, Stefan said, yes, he'd offered Darren a painting job, but it had nothing to do with going to a mansion in Northwest D.C. In fact, Stefan was in charge of a big project at George Washington University. The university had contracted with PCM to give its D.C. dorms a fresh coat of paint over the summer. It was a big job, and Stefan needed all the help he could get. He said he reached out to a bunch of guys who might be interested, several relatives, cousins, as well as his brothers, Darren and Darrell. Stefan said he wasn't sure of the exact date when he called Darren about the painting job, but he never got in touch with him. However, Stefan was able to reach Darrell, his younger half-brother. Darrell, it turned out, was in between jobs and took Stefan up on his offer. When he testified, Stefan talked about when he first learned Darren's attorneys were accusing him of murder. No one gave him a heads up. He saw that on the local news, too. It was a report from the start of Darren's murder trial, when Stefan learned that some of the DNA evidence linking Darren to the crime also matched his DNA. You might remember from our episode on the 5 things, a tiny hair was among the forensic evidence investigators discovered in the bloody bedding in the upstairs bedroom where the adults were found. Investigators said that hair matched Daron Wint, but mitochondrial DNA is shared by siblings who have the same mother, like Darren and Stefan. The only way to say for certain which brother the hair belonged to was if the root were still attached, which it wasn't. As far as hard physical evidence that implicated Stefan, that was it. Prosecutors made a point to say, while Stefan had the same mitochondrial DNA profile as Darren, so did their mom, and that didn't make her a suspect in the murders. But Darren Wint's lawyers had more. They also tried to cast suspicion on Stefan's actions and whereabouts during the murders. On May 13th and 14th of 2015, Stefan was working, managing several projects for PCM, including that dorm painting project. To help bolster his alibi, prosecutors pulled his timesheets for that week. On the 13th, the day the Savopoulos family and Vera Figueroa were taken hostage, Stefan's timesheets showed he was at work from 6:30 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. The following day, when the family was killed and the Savopoulos home set on fire, Stefan was working even longer hours, from 6 a.m. until midnight. Stefan explained his 17-hour workday. He was overseeing a job that ran late, and he was required to stay until it was finished. When it was her turn to cross-examine Stefan, Judy Pipe was stinging and hostile in her questioning. Remember, he was a prosecution witness, and this was her chance to question the man she'd spent a month telling the jury was actually responsible for the murders. So first, about those timesheets. She was incredulous that he could have really been working that whole time. And another thing, they were all handwritten. As far as supporting an alibi, in her words, they were worthless. Stefan responded that while his timesheets were handwritten, his supervisors at PCM could confirm their accuracy. The company tracks the GPS on his work truck, so they could show his white pickup was at work sites when he said he was there. Judy Pipe seized on that detail. A white truck? Did you know, she asked Stefan, that a witness reported seeing a white pickup truck leaving the area in Prince George's County when Darren's blue minivan was set on fire? No, Stefan said. Then Judy Pipe changed tack again. You borrowed Daron Wint's van, didn't you? She asked. Stefan seemed a bit exasperated. Why would I borrow a van if I have a pickup truck? He asked. Because you didn't want it traced back to you, Judy Pipe shot back. Another big part of Judy's cross-examination, let's call it the George Washington University connection. Seems a little long, but it works. The spot where Darren's van was parked on May 14th, 24th and K Streets, is near the school's campus. Now, we should say 24th and K is not right around the corner from where the dorm painting was going on, but it's in the same general vicinity, several blocks away, which seemed puzzling to us. Could it just be a coincidence? Remember, prosecutors suggested Darren parked his van at 24th and K and typed that intersection into his phone on May 14th. But why would he pick that area to park his van? Prosecutors never advanced a theory for that. It was part of the case against Daron Wint that even they acknowledged didn't make a whole lot of sense. It didn't make sense, Judy Pipe argued, because Darren wasn't the person who parked it there. It was Stefan. Prosecutors dismissed the defense's claims out of hand. Stefan was a witness at a murder trial. He was not the man on trial. In a way, we got the sense prosecutors didn't think Darren's lawyers were playing fair. They were throwing people under suspicion without a lot of evidence to back it up. Yes, Judy Pipe had a duty to present a vigorous defense of her client. But if her argument was that the government's case against Daron Wint was too weak, too full of gaps, then what did that make her case against Darren's two brothers? Still, prosecutors seemed compelled to do something to rebut the allegations against Stefan. Laura Bach called the head of human resources for PCM to the stand. That woman testified that supervisors did review employee timesheets, and if anything looked off, they would verify them using GPS systems in company vehicles. But the PCM manager told prosecutors the company only kept GPS records for 2 years before they were deleted. By the time Darren's lawyers sought to pin the blame on Stefan, more than 3 years had gone by. Then it got even more personal. Laura Bach told the jury, it's not surprising Daron would throw Stefan under the bus. He'd done it before. She referenced an incident back in March of 2015, 2 months before Daron was arrested for the murders on Woodland Drive. Early in the morning on March 23rd, 2015, police stopped Daron when he was driving his minivan into D.C. Daron was unemployed, and he told them he was driving into the city looking for day laborer work. It was a fairly routine traffic stop. Darren's van had bad tags, It was unregistered. But Daron didn't have a valid driver's license either, so he couldn't legally drive. When the police asked him for his name, Daron didn't hesitate. He gave a different name and a different date of birth. Daron said he was Stefan. In the early spring of 2015, before Daron moved in with his dad and his stepmom, he was living with Stefan in an apartment complex in New Carrollton, Maryland. It's just on the other side of Annapolis Road from LaFontaine-Bleu. At the time, Daron and Stefan's mother, Cheryl, was also living there, as well as their younger half-sister. It's a big family. Before living with Stefan, Daron had been living with their sister, Samantha, in her apartment nearby, but she made him leave after a bad argument. For all the tensions he had with them, Daron's family was seemingly supportive of him and wanted him to get back on his feet. For one thing, Daron stayed at Stefan's rent-free. And remember, Stefan was the one who gave Daron a cell phone. Daron's sisters, back in Guyana, were also sending him money every once in a while, when they could. Despite that, Daron seemed to have trouble getting along with his family members, with the people who cared about him, who took care of him and helped him. About a week after Daron was stopped by police and he gave Stefan's name, there was a fight between Daron and his younger half-sister over doing the dishes, of all things. There was shouting. Stefan said Daron pushed his younger sister, and he told Daron he had to leave. Not just that night to blow off some steam. He had to move out. Daron was enraged. Afterward, Daron left a voicemail for his girlfriend Vanessa on Facebook Messenger, telling her about the situation. You've never heard Daron's voice before. In the last 2 episodes, we had one of our colleagues read his testimony from the trial. But in this message we're about to play for you, you'll hear Daron's real voice for the first and likely the only time in this podcast. In it, Daron is telling Vanessa about being kicked out of Stefan's, and he mentions his mom, Cheryl.
Just so you know, Cheryl just put me out and called the police. But this ain't over yet, because I always say this, I did too much for these fucking people, and if I gotta go, they're gonna go with me too. So, I'm sorry. Bye.
You can hear how angry Daron sounds. And more than that, aggrieved. We thought that voicemail was a revealing portrait into how Daron felt toward his family, and especially Stefan, in the spring of 2015. But it turned out there was even more to that voice message. There was another part that the judge ruled was too incendiary for jurors to hear. The attorneys discussed that part of the tape when the jury was outside the courtroom, but they didn't play it. We wondered at the time, what was in it? What was so inflammatory about Daron's message that the judge wouldn't allow it to be played? After the trial ended, we requested a copy of the full audio file from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they handed it over.
Just so you know, Cheryl just put me out and called the police. But this ain't over yet.
That's the part we played already. But here's the part no one heard until the sentencing.
So this might be the last time you talk to me. Because when I leave here and I go back in the house, I'm going to kill each and every fucking last one of them. I'm going to shoot each and every last one of them in the fucking head. Because I always say this, I did too much for these fucking people. And if I gotta go, they're going to go with me too. So, I'm sorry. Bye.
Laura Bach called attention to Daron's rage in that voice message. Many of us have been angry, maybe even left an angry voicemail. But even at your most enraged, would you talk about shooting and killing your brother, your sister, your mom? Laura Bach said that voice message speaks for itself. This message is sponsored by Greenlight. Money is a part of daily life. You can't escape it. So teaching our kids about it early isn't just smart, it's an essential life skill. Greenlight is a debit card and money app for families. You can use it to send money to your child or grandchild's card, see how they spend it, and even assign chores to earn it. I know a pair of grandparents who prefer to send money to their granddaughter's Greenlight debit card for birthdays rather than buying something online. Because unlike a toy or a gift card, she's learning how to save and invest while building money confidence along the way. If I had Greenlight growing up, perhaps I would have known not to sign up for the high interest rate credit card because I wanted a few bucks off of a cool jacket at the mall. Give your kids the financial education many of us did not get. Join millions of parents and kids already using Greenlight. Start your risk-free Greenlight trial today at greenlight.com/nightmares. That's greenlight.com/nightmares. Prosecutors called Daron Wint to testify early on in the trial. But as the weeks ticked on and on, we still hadn't heard from Darrell. Then the prosecution rested its case. Then the defense rested its case. And still no Darrell. We couldn't figure out why prosecutors didn't have Darrell account for his alibi over the 22 hours the victims were held, the same way they'd done for Stefan. Darren's attorneys were pointing the finger at both brothers. And after prosecutors didn't call Darrell, why didn't the defense? Since they were the ones saying he was the real murderer. After Darren's explosive and exhausting 2 days on the stand, it was time for what's known as the rebuttal phase of the trial, when the prosecution is given one more chance to respond to the defense's case. Before they present their cases, both sides typically have to reveal their witness list, so there aren't usually many surprises. But in the rebuttal phase, prosecutors can call new witnesses unannounced.
What's the only NFL division where every single team has won a Super Bowl? Yes, indeed.
Fuck yeah. Toward the end of the trial, the strategy of the defense and prosecution was consuming our thoughts. Full disclosure, Jack and I were at a local trivia night with our content advisor, Julia Ziegler, enjoying some burgers, when I thought it might be smart to record our conversation about Darrell on my phone. Shout out to Nanny O'Brien's Pub.
It's just, we've been talking about this guy for 3 weeks. I've been talking about this guy for 3 years. And we are coming to the last day when we possibly could hear from him, and I don't think we're going to hear from him. It's very upsetting.
But why didn't the defense call Darrell? All this time we've been thinking, why didn't the prosecution? Are they going to call him in rebuttal?
Right.
But the defense is saying this person is
the
real murderer.
Yeah.
So wouldn't you call that person? Right. Get him on the stand? Where were you on May 13th and 14th?
We were baffled that we hadn't heard from Darrell.
Right, and so the question becomes, why not? Why not? Either what does the prosecution have on him, or what does the defense not want someone to hear? Why would you not put him on the stand? I guess we'll see. You don't want your pickle?
The next morning, before closing arguments were set to begin, Laura Bach called Darrell Wint to the stand. Darrell was wearing a gray hoodie and camouflage pants. We watched him lumber up from the back of the courtroom, walking heavy. He had a pair of construction gloves tucked in his back pocket. It looked like he just came from work. On the stand, Darrell tucked his tall frame into the witness box and sat slightly hunched forward. He looked tired, but he answered every question. Laura Bach began her questioning with his background. Darrell said he didn't grow up with Daron and Stefan and his other half-siblings from Guyana. They all have the same dad, but Darrell was born in Montgomery County, Maryland, after his dad had immigrated to the United States. When Daron and his other siblings came from Guyana in 2000, Darrell was about 14 or 15 years old. He'd grown up as an only child, and Darrell said he embraced his new family. Daron was the big brother he never had. Flash forward to 2015. Darrell was 29 years old. He was still living in Montgomery County. He had a girlfriend and several kids. He said he had a good relationship with Daron at that time. He didn't see Daron that often, or Stefan, or his other half-sister Samantha. But when they all got together, he said, it was love. When Darrell was on the stand, both prosecutors and Daron's defense team spent a lot of time on where he was on May 13th and 14th of 2015, when the Savopoulos family and Vera Figueroa were taken hostage, held for 22 hours, and then killed. Under oath, Darrell stated plainly, that week didn't really stand out to him. He said he couldn't really remember exactly where he was on those days 3 years earlier. Judy Pipe, Daron's lawyer, pounced. Her goal was to raise suspicion about Darrell, just as she'd tried to do with Stefan. She didn't have to prove that Darrell really committed the murders. She just had to make Darrell look suspicious enough that the jurors might doubt Darren's guilt. And it seemed like Darrell's fuzzy memory might be a liability. But, expecting that exact reaction from the defense, prosecutors had already dug up evidence that cleared Darrell. Most of it, digital evidence. Unlike Darren, Darrell had a cell phone plan, and he used his phone a lot over May 13th and 14th. Prosecutors were all too happy to submit into evidence the cell tower pings from Darrell's phone that show he was nowhere near Woodland Drive during those 22 hours. It seemed like every time Judy Pipe tried to pin something on Darrell, Laura Bach had a piece of evidence that supported his testimony. Here's Darrell's alibi. On May 13th, the day the victims were taken hostage, Darrell has a very different account from what Darren says happened. That morning, Darrell said he never met up with Darren to borrow his minivan, like Darren said, nor did he drop him off at Ed's house. But he was near the spot where Darren said he met Darrell. At 6:04 a.m., Darrell's phone pinged off a cell tower near Stefan's work in Beltsville, Maryland. But, Darrell said, he wasn't at PCM to meet Darren. He was there for a legitimate job. He decided to take Stefan up on his offer to do some dorm painting at George Washington University, make some money. And because it was an on-the-books job, his brother made him come in to fill out an application and do an official interview. Later that day, he couldn't remember exactly the time, Darrell said he went to a friend's house in Gaithersburg, a D.C. suburb in Montgomery County, Maryland. He made a point of going to his friend Anthony's house because it was a big day. Anthony had produced a music video for a group of local rappers and musicians. Darrell's cousin was part of the group. The video had just been released that morning. Darrell said he went to Anthony's house to watch it. And at 10:24 a.m., where is Darrell's phone? Exactly where he said it was, pinging off a cell tower near Anthony's house. Since May 13th, 2015 was a Wednesday, Darrell testified he probably would have gone to pick up his son from school that afternoon. Usually after school, they go to the library or to play basketball at the rec center. Sure enough, at 2:44 p.m., Darrell's phone is recorded pinging near a middle school in Tacoma Park. During the trial, there was no mention of surveillance video from the rec center or from the library. But that timestamp is important, 2:44 p.m. Remember, prosecutors believe the intruder slipped into the house on Woodland Drive sometime before 3:30 p.m. For the entire rest of that day, on May 13th, Darrell's phone is only pinging off cell towers in Tacoma Park. What about that night? Darrell didn't offer much initially. His memory was fuzzy. Prosecutor Laura Bach seemed a little vexed. She kind of teed up his answer, asking him if he spent a lot of time at bars in the Silver Spring area back in 2015. Darrell said he did, and he could have been out that night. Then Laura Bach asked if he ever stayed out really late at those bars in Silver Spring. Maybe drank in the parking lot after they were closed. Darrell said he did. Again, Laura Bach pulled his cell phone records, showing Darrell's phone pinging near the parking lot of a Silver Spring bar in the early morning hours of May 14th. Okay, that accounts for the day the victims were held hostage on Woodland Drive, when they ordered the pizzas, were calling the security company, and getting a plan together to withdraw the money. But what about May 14th, the day of the fire? Again, Darrell said he didn't remember. But since he wasn't working regularly, he was responsible for taking care of his younger kids during the day, while his girlfriend worked as a hairstylist. His friend Garnett also had a young daughter, so often the two dads would hang out and watch the kids together. On the afternoon of May 14th, the day the Savopoulos house went up in flames, where was Darrell's cell phone? Pinging in the Silver Spring neighborhood where Garnett lived. And cell phone pings weren't the only thing that put Darrell at Garnett's house. Oddly enough, it has to do with a pizza. Laura Bach entered something into evidence. The big screen in the courtroom lit up. On it, a Domino's pizza receipt appeared. She then asked Darrell, "Did you ever order pizza when you were at Garnett's house?" Darrell said he did, all the time. The receipt is stamped 12:16 p.m., around the time the Australian embassy workers saw a man matching Daron Wint's description slipping into the garage of the Savopoulos house. Remember, in Daron's version of events, Darrell was waiting for him inside the garage. But this pizza receipt showed the jury that around noon on May 14th, Darrell Wint was having lunch delivered to Garnett's house, a large pepperoni pizza with extra sausage and an 8-piece order of breadsticks. Later on, the evening of May 14th, after the fire on Woodland Drive, after the Porsche had been set on fire, Darrell said he did meet up with Daron. That matches with Daron's story. Darrell testified that Daron had been calling his phone all day, first from a number Darrell didn't recognize, likely the tow truck driver's phone, and then from their dad's home phone. Darrell said he drove to his dad's house to meet up with Daron. He said when he got there, they were just talking, hanging out. Darrell said he didn't see his big brother that much, so every time they met up, he said it felt like reuniting. Darrell testified that he told Daron he had to stop by Walmart to pick up some painting clothes and other supplies for the dorm painting job Stefan had hired him for at George Washington University. The orientation and training were the next morning. Daron decided to come along for the ride. But, Darrell said, Daron also asked him to make a stop of his own. He said his van had run out of gas on the road, and he needed to stop and pick some up to get it running again. Darrell said they stopped at a gas station, and Daron filled up a large bucket from the pump. Then they drove to Walmart. During the trial, prosecutors pulled up the Walmart surveillance video and played it for the jury. The first shot is of the parking lot. The timestamp reads 10:23 p.m. You can see a dark-colored sedan pull into a parking space, and 2 people get out. The next shot shows Daron and Darrell walking into the store. In the video, Darrell is wearing a dark jacket and light-colored jeans. He's taller than Daron. Next to him, Daron is wearing gray sweatpants and a white hoodie with a red stripe down the arms. Now, remember, in Daron's version of the story, the Walmart trip supposedly comes after a very tumultuous day with his brother. He said Darrell drove him to Woodland Drive, tried to get him to steal from it. Then they had a big fight about it. Darrell refused to take him to his van and left him in a parking lot. And then, later that evening, Daron saw on the news that same fancy house where they'd been arguing and eating pizza had gone up in flames, and 4 people were killed. In Daron's story, the two did go to Walmart, but after a day like the one he described in court, you might expect things to be a little tense between the brothers. The Walmart surveillance video is fairly clear. Daron is smiling, casually chatting with his brother as they walk in. Laura Bach pointed to Daron in the video and asked the jury, "Does this look like a man who has the wool pulled over his eyes by his brother?" The running timestamp on the video shows the men spent about 20 minutes in the store. At 10:43 p.m., the brothers are checking out. Darrell puts gloves, painter's pants, a belt, and socks on the counter. He pays with a debit card. Daron doesn't buy anything. Then the surveillance camera tracks the brothers walking out of the store and back to the car. Now, here's where the two brothers' stories differ. Daron said after the Walmart stop, Darrell drove him to a house in Cheverly, Maryland, about 15 minutes away from the Walmart. Darrell went in, and Daron stayed in the car. Daron testified he didn't know whose house it was. But Darrell tells a different story. He says after they left the Walmart, Daron started giving him directions. The bucket of gas was still in the back seat, and Darrell said he thought they were going to put gas in Daron's broken-down van. Darrell said he started to recognize the area. There were a lot of warehouses. There was a school bus lot nearby, and it was near where Daron used to work, at a metalworking plant called Metal Fab. We wanted you to hear part of Darrell's testimony in his own words. We tried to reach Darrell, but since we couldn't get in touch with him, we had our colleague Jamal Bowens read his testimony. Lauren Larson is again reading Laura Bach's part.
Now, what happened when you got to wherever it was Mr. Wint told you to go?
We pulled over on by the warehouse back there. We pulled over. He got out the car. He got out the car for 5 minutes. And when he came back, and we left.
All right. Did you see his van?
No.
You didn't see it anywhere around there?
No,
Was it lit or dark back there?
it was dark.
Okay, now, are you still sitting in the driver's seat?
Yes.
When Daron Wint got out of the car, were you watching exactly where he went to?
No.
I mean, honestly, did you really care where the van was?
No.
Darrell said he wasn't sure, but he thought Daron took a bag with him. Maybe a plastic bag? He didn't know. Daron didn't drive away in his van after supposedly putting gas in it. And when he got back in the car, Darrell said he couldn't really remember if Daron still had the bag with him. He was distracted. He felt like something was off. Then, as they drove out of the industrial park, Darrell said he saw smoke from the direction where Daron had walked when he left the car.
All right, did you say anything to him like, hey, buddy, there's some smoke back there?
No.
All right, what's going through your mind right then?
I just know something looks suspect.
Well, did you say what's going on?
No.
Why not?
I don't ask too much questions.
Well, why not?
I don't like to know people's business.
Why don't you want to know people's business?
Because it's none of my business.
Well, do you want to be sitting in a place like this?
No. Lesson learned.
After they left the industrial park, Darrell said they decided to go back to Walmart. A second trip? Well, Darrell said he'd forgotten a few items he needed for the painter's training. Cue the video. Laura Bach hit play for the jury, and the Walmart surveillance video showed the brothers, again, walking through the Walmart doors. Now the timestamp reads 11:26 p.m. At checkout, Darrell puts a backpack and a water bottle on the counter. And again, he pays with a debit card. But this time, Daron buys something. A black and pink drawstring backpack. In the surveillance video, you can see something else. When he opens his wallet, it looks like it's stuffed with cash. Darrell told Laura Bach that after they left Walmart for the second time, he dropped Daron off at their dad's house, and they made plans to link up again the next day, Friday. According to the cell phone records, the next morning, Daron repeatedly tried calling Darrell. He called more than 24 times on Friday. Darrell testified he remembered that. He also remembered intentionally ignoring those calls. He said he didn't like the vibe he caught the night before. On Friday night, Daron asked Godfrey, his sister's boyfriend, to help him burn his van. An hour after they talked, in the same area where Daron had walked off from Darrell's car the night before, with the bucket and the plastic bag, Daron's blue minivan went up in flames. Now it was Judy Pipe's turn to cross-examine Darrell, and she had clearly come prepared. But she did have a difficult job ahead of her. The government had all these phone records and the pizza receipt to account for Darrell's whereabouts over the 22 hours the victims were held and then killed. They didn't have an account for every move he made, but again, Darrell wasn't on trial for murder. Still, Judy Pipe used what she had. Julia Ziegler is again reading Judy Pipe's part, and Jamal Bowens is continuing Darrell's testimony.
So as you sit here today, what's your memory about what happened on May 13th? Did you go home that night, or were you out at a bar?
I can't remember.
So moving forward to May 14th, I guess as you sit here today, you don't remember where you were on May 14th, right?
No. I just know I was, 9 times out of 10, I was in Montgomery County somewhere.
Okay. Well, one of the reasons you're saying you were in Montgomery County is partly that receipt that Miss Bach put up there from Domino's Pizza, right? You saw that receipt?
Yeah, I seen that.
And there's a receipt from Domino's Pizza on May 14th of 2015 around 12:15 p.m., right?
Yeah.
And I think Miss Bach put in there were a few receipts from Domino's. That's somewhere you order from pretty often, right?
Yes.
That's a phone number you know off the top of your head?
Yes.
I guess you would agree with me that having your cell phone GPS alibi you during the times of this crime would be a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You would agree with me that having a credit card receipt that alibis you somewhere else would be a good thing, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And according to you, You keep your phone with you on May 13th and May 14th, right?
Just in general? Yeah, I do.
If anyone's making phone calls from that phone, you say that's you, right?
Yes.
You didn't pass off your phone to anyone.
No.
So when everybody's asking you all these questions about where were you on May 14th, you didn't scroll through your phone to see who you were calling that day?
No.
You didn't notice there was a phone call from Domino's on May 14th at 12:15?
No.
You didn't notice that because you never once told the government that you were at Garnett's house ordering pizza around the time that this house went up in flames, right?
No, I don't think so.
You never told the police that either, right?
Uh-uh.
Because you weren't with your phone on May 14th, were you, sir?
I was.
Did you have Garnett Williams cover for you for the police in relation to this case?
I didn't need him to or ask him to.
Basically, she argued, Darrell was not a novice. He knew his phone could be tracked. To account for all Darrell's cell phone pings, Judy Pipe theorized Darrell could have easily handed off his phone to a friend, maybe to Garnett. It sounds devious, like the work of a criminal mastermind. And basically, that's how Judy Pipe wanted the jury to think of Darrell. Now, Darrell does have a criminal record, but nothing in it supported her theory. The one thing Judy Pipe could find was a first-degree assault conviction back in 2007. Other than that offense 11 years earlier, Darrell's criminal record included convictions for possession of marijuana and possession with intent to distribute. It seemed misplaced that we and the jury would end up hearing far more about Darrell's criminal record than we'd ever hear about Darren's. We knew from searching online court records that Darren also had a criminal record, which included far more incidents of violence, threats, and assault than his brother. We'll revisit those in a later episode. But none of that was brought before the jury. None of it came into play during the trial. And that's not really surprising. Our justice system is supposed to do just that, protect someone's right to a fair trial by making sure that their innocence or guilt isn't determined by their past actions, but only by the facts of the case. Judy Pipe fired a barrage of sharp questions at Darrell. She made sure to mention that he didn't have an immunity deal with prosecutors, seeming to suggest he could still be charged with something.
You don't have any protection from the government for getting prosecuted in this case, right?
No.
Nobody's promised you that they're not going to charge you with everything that Daron Wint's been charged with, right?
No.
Nobody's promised you that you're not going to go to prison for what happened in that house on May 13th and 14th, right?
No.
And you know that anything you say right now, here on this stand, can be used to put you in prison for those crimes, right?
Yes.
You came here with a lawyer today, right?
Yes.
And you've had a lawyer representing you pretty much throughout this case?
Yes.
As you sit here today, you don't want to be sitting in the seat that Daron Wint's sitting in, do you?
No.
How tall are you, Mr. Wint?
6'2".
Back in May of 2015, about the same height?
Yeah.
How much do you weigh about?
I weigh 240 now.
About the same in May of 2015?
No. I was probably like maybe 200.
Okay. You're a little bit bigger now than you were then?
Yeah.
Are you working these days?
Yes.
What kind of work are you doing?
Construction.
When you showed up here to court today, were you wearing a construction vest?
Yeah.
Right now, in your back pocket, do you have a pair of work gloves?
Yeah.
Judy Pipe was trying to draw any connection she could, but Darrell took it in stride. His demeanor led on he didn't want to be there, but he came across convincing in his answers. Then, Laura Bach tied up any loose ends the jury might still have about Darrell's involvement.
You were asked a bunch of questions about immunity. Did you ever ask anybody for some sort of immunity?
No.
Did you ever go into anybody's house and set it on fire here?
No.
Did you kill anybody?
No.
Did you burn any cars?
No.
Do you know, what would you need immunity for?
I didn't ask for it.
Do you want to be in here testifying against your brother?
No, I don't.
Okay, what does it feel like to be sitting here testifying against your brother?
This is disappointing.
What do you mean it's disappointing?
It's disappointing. It's just You know, that's my big brother. And look what you're doing. It's like he should be ashamed of himself for what he's doing. For real.
Laura Bach called other witnesses as part of her effort to show the jury Darrell was not taking victims hostage on Woodland Drive on May 13th. One of them was Anthony Anderson, Darrell's friend whom he visited that day to celebrate the release of the music video. When Anthony took the stand, he testified, yes, Darrell had stopped by that day, and they had watched the video. That day stuck out in his memory, of course, because May 13th was the day the music video officially dropped. The music video was for a song called Haters Hate. In the courtroom, the prosecutors pulled up a screenshot of the YouTube page for the music video. And sure enough, it was uploaded on May 13th, 2015. Now, Haters Hate wasn't a huge hit. It didn't go viral or anything. The video has a couple thousand views on YouTube. But you've heard it before. Haters Hate is the theme music for this podcast.
Watch them haters hate. They get mad. I'm so flat today. Every time I hit the streets, I bet the freaks cooperate. Yes, yes, you know they call me Mr. Mode. I do not gossip play. I see, I want, I cry, I give that just the way I operate.
We chose this song as our theme not only because it's catchy. We picked it because it seemed to symbolize our experience covering the twists and turns of this trial. Because it was one of those little details that didn't seem to matter in the moment. But later it took on new significance. When Haters Hate dropped in May of 2015, it was just a music video that Darrell's friends had put together, that he happened to watch the day it was released. 3 years later, as he was being accused of a horrible crime, testifying at the end of his brother's murder trial, that video had become a key piece of evidence, giving Darrell Wint a solid alibi. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Quince. Fall is upon us, and I don't know about you, maybe it's the back-to-school fresh start that we used to have as kids, but I tend to update my wardrobe when the cooler temperatures hit, and Quince makes it easy to look polished and save big without compromising on quality. I already have a few of their signature 100% cashmere sweaters. Fancy, huh? A good gift, by the way, at $50, as well as their washable silk tops and skirts. But if you're looking for a nice wool coat or to update your denim for the fall, now's the time. And it won't break the bank. Quince does it by cutting out the middleman and partnering with ethical top-tier factories to deliver luxury quality at half the price of similar brands. Keep it classic and cozy this fall with long-lasting staples from Quince. Go to quince.com/nightmares for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/nightmares to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/nightmares. When Darrell was on the stand, both the defense and the prosecution had more questions than just about where he was on May 13th and 14th. They asked about his role in Darren's arrest. It's where this episode started and where it will end. You already know that Darrell was with Daron when U.S. Marshals surrounded their caravan. Here's what happened. May 21st, 2015 was a Thursday. It was exactly 1 week since the fire on Woodland Drive, and Daron had officially been named a suspect. Darrell had seen Darren's picture all over the news the night before. He told Laura Bach people were blowing up his phone all day, asking him if he knew where his brother was. Darrell spent the day in downtown D.C., painting the dorms at George Washington University, doing the job Stefan got him. While he was painting, Darrell said he got a call from Daron, and he answered it. At this point, Daron was still in New York. After he and Vanessa saw his face flash on the news, they fled her Brooklyn apartment to a hotel room, barely escaping the police. Darrell said it was at this point he told Daron he needed to come home and turn himself in. Darrell said he knew Daron was in a bad spot. He was wanted by the police. His face was all over the news. And Darrell said he was concerned for Daron's safety. He was afraid his brother would get hurt, maybe by the police. By the end of the phone call, Daron agreed he'd come back to D.C. to turn himself in. But first, he wanted to meet up with Darrell. He needed help getting a lawyer. Back in New York, Daron paid an off-the-books livery cab driver $1,100 using $100 bills to drive him back to the nation's capital. By the time Daron got to D.C., it was around lunchtime. Darrell told Daron to meet him at 19th and F Streets in downtown D.C., near the dorms where he was working at George Washington University, but not too close. When they met up during his lunch break, Darrell said he and Daron came up with a plan to get Daron a lawyer. They were going to do it before he turned himself in. Daron told Darrell he'd already been in contact with a lawyer, a guy who called himself Lonnie the Street Lawyer, and had regular segments on TV and radio shows. But the problem was paying him. Darrell said that Daron had a lot of cash with him, but the lawyer told Daron he wanted to be paid in money orders. Darrell said he wasn't sure how much the lawyer wanted, but he thought his brother mentioned $10,000. When they went to get a money order, Darrell said they quickly realized they had a problem. Most places cap the limit on a money order at $1,000. They'd have to go to several places to get enough money orders. But Darrell's lunch break was almost up, and he had to get back to work. And Daron couldn't very well just hang out and wait. So Darrell said he decided to get his brother a hotel room. He knew he'd be late getting back to work, but that way, after Darrell's shift ended, they could drive around, get the money orders, get the lawyer, and then Daron could turn himself in. But there was still another problem. Darrell had lost his ID, and he knew he needed one to get a hotel room, so he came up with a quick fix. Darrell drove with Daron over to his friend Garnett's house in Silver Spring so they could use Garnett's ID. The three men then drove to a Howard Johnson motel in College Park, Maryland. It's the kind of place where a room costs less than $100, and the doors to each room face the parking lot. Garnett used his ID and signed for the motel room, but Darrell said Daron paid for it. And when Darrell headed back to finish his shift painting the dorms, an hour and a half later, he said Daron had all that cash with him inside the room. Now, remember, Darrell Wint was called to testify by Laura Bach, the tough federal prosecutor who does not tolerate evasive answers. Darrell was her witness, but she still pushed back on parts of his story. Prosecutors were clear they didn't think Darrell was involved in the murders, but she knew she had to essentially show her work for the jury. She had to ask questions she knew they'd want answers to.
Why do you have to, I don't understand, why do you have to get him a hotel? Why not just take him to the lawyer?
Because it didn't, with that situation, it's just not that simple.
Well, why isn't it that simple?
Because I don't trust no lawyer, for one. And then two, it's still me and him didn't have like a solid conversation. So I'm not just going to send my brother to the wolves. Like, we sat there and talked first, and then we came to a conclusion.
Okay, when you say you hadn't had a conversation yet, you mean a conversation about what?
Just like what he's going to do. Like, you're going to turn yourself in, or you're going to go about your business.
Okay, did you ever attempt to sit down and have a conversation with your brother about whether or not the stuff that you saw on the news was true?
No.
Okay, well, why not?
Because I didn't want to know.
Why wouldn't you want to know?
Because I just didn't want to know. Yeah.
Darrell said after work he went to the Howard Johnson, and his brother gave him stacks of cash to get more money orders. Now, to get all the money that Daron needed for the lawyer, Darrell would have to make 10 different stops, at least. He needed help. So he called a girl he was friends with, someone he could trust. Chelsea Nunez was several years younger than Darrell, but they both sort of grew up together in the same neighborhood in Tacoma Park, Maryland. When he called, Chelsea was hanging out with one of her friends, Shia. She said she'd help get the money orders too. Darrell told them all this cash was to get a lawyer for a friend who was turning himself into police. You won't get into any trouble, he said. They met up, piled into Chelsea's white Chevy Cruze, and went out to get as many money orders as they could. Darrell, Chelsea, and Shia drove around Montgomery County, Maryland, hitting up every Cash Depot, Western Union, and Rite Aid they could find. Chelsea Nunez later testified that Darrell handed them stacks of $100 bills to get those money orders. Getting them all took a long time, and it was starting to get late. Daron was still waiting back at the Howard Johnson, and Darrell said he was starting to feel nervous. All day long, people had been calling him, asking about his brother. They wanted to know if Darrell really knew where his brother was, and was it true? Did his brother really murder those people? Darrell said he felt pressure. That's the word he kept using on the stand. He wanted to help his older brother, but he didn't trust lawyers. He didn't trust the police. And now he felt like he was entangled in the situation. He was in a car with piles of these money orders and thousands of dollars in leftover cash. Darrell collected it all, said goodbye to Chelsea and Shia, and asked to be dropped off at his cousin's place. He said he was looking for a voice of reason. When he testified earlier in the trial, Darrell's cousin, George Elias, said they didn't really have a hanging out type of relationship. But when Darrell showed up at his house in May of 2015, a day after Darren's face was all over the news, George Elias said he had a pretty good idea of what Darrell wanted to talk about. At first, George wouldn't even let his cousin in the house. They talked out front. On the stand, George Elias seemed to have a sort of older and wiser vibe, the kind of all-around peacemaker, problem-solver type who you could turn to with a family issue. Darrell confided in George that he and Darren had a plan, that he'd spent all evening getting money orders, and that they were going to take Darren to get a lawyer and then go to the police. But, Darrell said, he wanted his cousin's guidance. He was getting nervous about all this. George said he'd help Darrell, but he gave him an ultimatum. If you want my help, you have to turn your brother in now. Darrell agreed. George said he'd go with Darrell and turn Darren in, but he didn't want Darren riding with him. He'd be driving his work vehicle, and he didn't want it showing up on the news. It did, though. George worked as an automotive mechanic and drove a big white box truck. So Darrell called the girls back to pick him up. When they returned, Chelsea and Shia had picked up another friend, a woman in her 20s named Felicia. Then they all drove back to meet Darren at the Howard Johnson, the white box truck, followed by the Chevy Cruze. When they got to the motel, Darrell was getting ready to go inside when his cousin George stopped him and laid down the law. If you don't come back around that corner with Darren, if you come back by yourself, I'm calling the police right here and now. Darrell went into the room alone. Inside, Darrell said he handed his brother $23,000 in money orders and about $7,000 he still had in cash. Darrell said it was at that point he leveled with his brother. He said they were both feeling the pressure, and they decided to cut out the part of the plan where they'd get a lawyer. They'd go straight to the police. And afterward, Darrell said, he'd take the money orders and go get a lawyer for his brother. He said Darren agreed. It's a different version of the story than we've heard before. When Darren testified, he didn't mention any agreement. He said when he walked out of the Howard Johnson that night, he thought they were going to meet the lawyer. But what everyone does agree on is what happened next. Darren and Darrell left the motel room. Darrell walked Darren to Chelsea's car, and Darren got in the back seat. Darrell got in the box truck with his cousin George. Felicia Ruffin, the young woman who had been picked up by her girlfriends later, was sitting in the back seat of the Chevy Cruze when a stranger got in next to her. Felicia also testified during Darren's trial. She said she didn't know Darren. She'd never seen him before that night. And remember, she didn't have anything to do with getting the money orders either. Felicia said inside that car, the girls were carrying on as normal. When she was picked up, she thought it was going to be a girls' night. They just had to make a quick stop to give someone a ride as a favor to a friend. In the car, Felicia said the women were talking about boys and trying to goad the guy in the back seat into conversation, but he wasn't interested in small talk. Felicia said he was sort of rude. He shut her down when she tried to make silly conversation. As the trip went on, he seemed to grow more and more agitated. He kept asking, "How long? Where are we going?" During the ride, he was making calls, but he turned down the volume on the phone, so Felicia said she couldn't hear what anyone on the other end was saying. In case you're wondering how Darren was making calls on a phone that only operated off of Wi-Fi, Darren testified at this point he was using a flip phone that Darrell had lent him to call his fiancée Vanessa. But he was also using it to try and reach Darrell in the box truck. Darrell wasn't picking up. It turns out Darrell was making calls of his own. First, Darrell called his father Dennis, who's also Daron's father. Darrell said his dad gave him a phone number. He grabbed a pen and scribbled it down on a yellow piece of paper. And he dialed it. Detective Jeff Owens, the lead detective on the case, answered the phone. He gave Darrell an address, 300 Indiana Avenue Northwest. Darrell scrawled that down using a black Sharpie, and next to it he wrote the word jail and underlined it 3 times. Darrell was turning his brother in. At this point, the box truck was traveling in front of the Chevy Cruze as the 2 vehicles made their way down Route 1 and into D.C. Shortly before 11 p.m., they crossed the district line, where Route 1 turns into Rhode Island Avenue in northeast D.C. The 2 vehicles continued on, rolling down a gentle slope past rows of 2-story craftsman-style homes and small chain-link fenced lawns, unaware that some 30 law enforcement vehicles were descending on their location. Suddenly, the slow ride came to a screeching halt. The U.S. Marshals moved in, surrounding the box truck and the Chevy Cruze on all sides. An unmarked police car cut between the car and the box truck and reversed, blocking the way. Chelsea slammed on the brakes. She thought there'd been some sort of accident. Then 2 other cars rammed both sides of her Chevy Cruze. Felicia said the girls screamed. From the back seat, she saw what looked like a billion lights. There were dozens of uniformed police swarming around the car. They had guns drawn and pointing at them. It was like a movie, Felicia said. She looked down and saw bright red laser dots on her chest. The police shouted for them to get out with their hands up and back away from the car. Felicia said she and the girls were terrified. And amid the chaos, Daron just kept repeating, "They're here for me." On the next episode of 22 Hours, An American Nightmare,
The jury has reached a verdict in the murder trial of Daron Wint.
we hear from some of the people who decided Daron's fate.
Why did this have to happen? I think that's another one of those questions that we may never know, right? Like, was it entirely about money? Was there a revenge component?
You know, this was a difficult crime for one person to pull off alone.
Hi, everybody. We're back with Julia Ziegler and Jack Moore to discuss how the podcast came together. Thanks for being with me, guys. I just wanted to say we just heard the big reveal of episode 9, which is Haters Hate, the music that was introduced as evidence that then became our opening song. I feel like this was one of the best parts of the podcast because I felt like it was exciting to give the listener that reveal.
I did too.
What do you guys recall about, I remember being in court and they played the song as part of the evidence to where Darrell was as his alibi. And I was like, oh, it was just like, it just had power and it was good. And I think that it sort of had like a little bit of a crime element to it, like an eye for an eye. That part it just felt like it fit. Jack, what do you remember about it?
Well, okay, this is interesting, because now we're going back 2018. What is that? That's almost 8 years. Because my recollection, I don't know if they played it in the courtroom or if it was just a screenshot of the YouTube page. And later we looked it up. I can't
No,
remember.
I remember hearing it in the courtroom because I kind of jumped out of my seat and made an spectacle.
I mean, I know we definitely then looked it up on YouTube ourselves.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, this actually has a kind of a nice beat,
Yeah, and
yes,
Julie,
it's evidence, but
Like the ding, 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 ding. I went back again, something else I went back to and listened to because I was trying to also remember the words. I could remember, watch those haters hate. And then after that, I was like, I wanted to go back. But I remember I loved that part, Megan, too. I just thought that was one of those full circle moments, for the audience anyway. And I wonder if for the audience, it made as big of an impact as we thought it would.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those reveals, like you said, where it was something that they had been listening to every single episode almost to the end, right? And then we reveal it that hey, this theme music actually has a place in this entire, situation.
Yeah.
It was key to the situation.
Very, yeah. But legally, it wasn't like we could just take it and play it. So
Well, right.
that fell on you, unfortunately for you.
It sure did. I love our legal department. They keep us out of trouble. But yes, that is something, music, there are music rights, right? And you can't just use anything you want, especially in a podcast that's going to be out there and available for anyone. You have to get permission from the artist in order to use it. And so that part fell on you guys. You guys had to find Ramon. Yep. And you guys had to see if he would be willing to let us use it. And the fact of the matter is, if he said no, that was going to be a big bummer for us because we were so set on that music. And I just remember us crossing our fingers and hoping that he would say yes. And I think it took a few times too. Like he said yes, but then we couldn't. We didn't hear back from him. We had to have him sign legally a legal document.
I had talked to him on the phone, and he was very nice. And because the thing is that these were his family members who were involved in this. So it was always trying to approach the situation respectfully, even though we wanted something. But and also we were it would have been nice to talk to him for the podcast. He didn't want to do that. But he said, he gave like verbal consent, but then the lawyers wanted like an Adobe DocuSign, and I thought, oh God, I don't know, like if somebody asked me to Adobe DocuSign something, I don't know that I would do that, So I remember thinking, oh, maybe this won't. But I think, my recollection is that he returned it back like that day, or very soon after. So then we, felt secure, felt good, and being able to move forward because we had been, I don't know if this has come up yet, but we had a different name for the podcast that we wanted, and I think kind of all's well that ends well, because I think 22 Hours is a great name, so that turned out to be not such a bad thing. But in the moment, I think that we were kind of feeling discouraged about that we couldn't go with the original title, and then we were really set on using this music, and so we were thinking, well, if we can't use this music, but that worked out.
So most of the story was initially written off the details, as we discussed, about our conversations from court, my notes, and our understanding of the timeline, and how Jack earlier in his podcast said, unraveling all of those random little details. And I remember you once describing it like, think about cutting up a piece of paper and just throwing it on the floor and then trying to put it back together. It was just, there were details over 6 weeks. And then taking the details and then saying, have we said this before? Should we hold this for later because it makes more sense in the story? And the way Jack's brain works is so different than the way my brain works, which is why I think we work well together. I'm big picture, he's details. But when it came to telling the story from an audio perspective, for example, like when we got the firefighter calls, that was in the first episode. I think that really made that come to life. And then a lot of the audio we used too was from WTOP reports throughout the years on these different events that happened sometimes when it was a weekend or whatever, and there are different people on staff. But can you talk about, Jack, because some of the audio we got from evidence. Do you remember? Because we were really pulling from a bunch of different sources.
I think that part of what led us through the narrative. I mean, there was the overall story, and trying to put that into chronological order. I mean, there's a crime that was committed, and it took place over 22 hours. Then there was the search for the suspect, and then there was all the legal proceedings, and then there was his trial. So there's a lot of different timelines we're working on, which is a big part of the story. Is working across these multiple timelines. And then there's a timeline of us doing the podcast ourselves. So there was we were dealing with multiple timelines, and then we were writing to the audio a lot. So that was kind of the other axis that we kind of revolved around, which is, what audio did we have? We had the firefighter radio calls from the time that they responded to the fire. We had the voicemail that Daron Wint had left, the very threatening voicemail. We had some of the calls that the victims had made to the outside world while they were being held. We had some of our own interview audio with Nellie, the housekeeper, and Margaret Pressler, the eyewitness. some of the people who we couldn't get the attorneys themselves, but then the people who knew the attorneys to kind of describe them and how they worked and things. So and then the WTOP news reports from various parts along this story. So then that was the other way that we kind of oriented ourselves. We were trying to track the story of the narrative, and then what sound did we have? Because sometimes you write to the sound, and that helps determine how you're going to tell the story. So we kind of had those two revolving axes. What sound did we have, and how could we use it in furtherance of the story? There was one element of the story of the Savopoulos family's Porsche being driven from their house out to Prince George's County and then set on fire. And we went to that location, and it was 3-4 years later, and there was still the burn in the asphalt. We could still find the exact spot that it was lit on fire. And we recorded ourselves, being there, and you can hear the traffic on that highway going past, and the leaves skittering across the parking lot, because I think it was still wintertime. So then, okay, we knew where that fit, the Porsche being driven from the house. We knew where that was after the crime, that was after the murders. So we knew where that fit there. And then how do we write to use that based upon the sound that we had, which was us being at the location. So I think kind of at every point along the way, we're orienting ourselves based upon those two things. What's the story, the big picture story, and then what sound do we have? And we're kind of just, orienting ourselves with those 2 points. Yeah.
And as part of the sound that we used to tell the story, we had to get approval to use sound from ABC News. At the time, we were ABC affiliates. And then later, I did an interview with them on 2020, because on the day of I think it was on the day of the sentencing, but we were working with them because they had sound that we couldn't get. And there's a serendipitous twist here as I tell it, because I want to bring in a surprise guest. It's my dad.
Oh,
Jack Cloherty, who used to work at ABC News. And he's popping up here in any moment, hopefully.
Hey, you guys have me?
Hi.
Hey, surprise.
We love it. We love a surprise.
Hey, Julia, how are you? Jack, how are
I'm
you?
good.
Hey.
Good to see you.
Dad, can we see your face? Can you turn your camera on?
I thought I had it on. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just said this is a serendipitous twist.
There he is.
Yeah, well, I got a couple false alarms. I've been waiting here, so.
I had to do the dramatic entrance,
Oh, okay. And then we blew it, right?
We blew it, but that's okay. I can edit it later. Okay, so the reason I'm bringing my dad in is he was at ABC News at the time covering justice and homeland security, and he got a tip about Darren's arrest that ended up being the audio that we used in the podcast. So, and I found this out maybe 2 months ago. He was like, "Oh yeah, you didn't know that was me." I'm like, "What?" So I thought if you could tell us the story, sort of how that all came together, Dad.
Yeah, well, as you say, I was covering justice and homeland security we had a good team at ABC News, Pierre Thomas, our correspondent, and Jack Date, one of the other producers. So we had been doing a lot with U.S. Marshals and the FBI, over the last few years prior to this. So that night, in fact, I think I did a story with Pierre for World News about how they were looking for Daron Wint up in New York, up in Brooklyn. And, we thought, okay, so it's going to be happening up there. We don't have to worry too much about it, except gathering information. And then I was at home that night, and I don't know, it was about 9:45, 10 o'clock. I get a call from a source of mine who said, they think this guy's back in town. They think he's up near College Park, and they've got people out looking for him up there around Route 1. So I'm like, oh man, we gotta scramble, right? So I called our news desk, and as luck would have it, you guys know TV. There was no camera crew. There was nobody.
You need a camera crew at the last second?
I know. So anyway, we call our affiliate WJLA, Channel 7 in Washington. And it turns out, I think they had been hearing some rumblings too, but they didn't have any specifics. So we said, Route 1 near College Park, just go to like Rhode Island Avenue and drive towards College Park and see what you see with the cops. So that's what they did. They sent a crew out. They cruised up Rhode Island Avenue, and there they were. They had pulled over the Chevy Cruze and the box truck, and they jumped out and got the video and audio of Daron being arrested. So it was a small part, but I'm glad we got the video. Glad we got that audio that you guys could use.
I love, by the way, in this story,
Amazing.
I love in this story that he calls his newsroom, but he doesn't call his daughter, who is also working on the story.
I had to worry about that mortgage first, Meg.
Right, yeah.
I think I called you. I don't remember.
Yeah, and we didn't know for sure that it was him. I remember too, they were like, it could be him, it wasn't like a slam dunk. So that was also a challenge. It was everybody was looking for
because
him.
the scene, as you guys have described so aptly, I mean, it was kind of crazy. A car with a couple people in it, and then the truck, and like, what the heck is a truck doing there? And later it came out. There's money in the money, and I think was it? You guys correct me if I'm wrong. Was the money stashed in the car or the truck? But we were trying to find out what was going on there, and it was quite a confusing scene to try to sort out.
Well, and the fascinating thing, and it was true, I think, so many points in this story, is that it took years to find out what was that truck doing there, who were those other people. It was not something that immediately, there were answers to. And it's certainly like, okay, if there's a truck involved, I mean, you see that with like someone trying to, plan an attack or something. Usually, it wouldn't make sense to turning yourself in with and especially in DC, there's all kind of places by the Capitol where you can't drive a box truck by, for that very reason. And the kind of so many points along the podcast, there's the outside story and the inside story, and it took years to find out the inside story. We could see what was going on from the outside, these events, but before we heard from some of the key players involved, it took years, and it wasn't until the trial. And in that case, it was almost kind of anticlimactic, because the young women in the car were kind of roped into the situation at the last minute. They really didn't even know what they were doing. It was almost, except for the horrible things that had happened, it was almost comedic. The way they described that day, they were going around exchanging this cash for all these money orders, and they really didn't even know why they were doing it. And they were so
disorganized.
It was not the but it was.
I know Megan mentioned this, and I found the same was true. After the arrest, the information really dried up, and it really actually put a lot of pressure on us, because people were saying, well, you heard about the arrest, you're supposed to have all these great sources. What happens now? And nobody was getting anything. And I think one of the reasons is that the investigators didn't know what the heck they had, and it took them a long time to sort this out. I don't know if that was your experience, but people just couldn't figure out why some of these guys were let go. I mean, here they are in this with this horrible murder. They pull these people over with the primary suspect, but then none of them are charged immediately. As I recall, they basically cut him loose, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And I remember too, that's part of the reason that I thought, and in building, again, just like Jack said, there's an inside and there's an outside story, and you're human and you're speculating a little bit in your head, like, well, this must mean something. And the police had said initially this had to be more than one person.
That was in the original police report.
Right. And so then they pull over more than one person.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, well, this has to be part of the story. And then they let him go. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And obviously we find out later, much later, how it all kind of pieced together. But again, as we were discussing, not everything has like a perfect little bow on the end of it.
I know it was a very unusual case, and a very unusual arrest too. I mean, I remember people being thankful at the time, because when they pulled that car over and did the pinning operation, I think they were ready for a shootout. I mean, they didn't know it was going to happen. Here's a guy who they believe killed all these people, and they had a cold-blooded murderer on their hands, and they were afraid that it was going to really get ugly at that scene. And I was kind of worried about that when I called in, and we were sending a crew out there, and I was afraid all hell was going to break loose out there, and it was very fortunate that that didn't happen, and they just surrendered.
Yeah. Well, it was too good to not bring you in and interview you
I'm
about.
so glad you did.
I mean, it's just so funny.
It is funny.
And it's funny too, because I mean, part of the reason, just very quickly, almost the entire reason I got the bug for journalism was from watching my dad work. And we both worked in DC, and very rarely did we overlap in any kind of assignment. And there was a day during the trial, I think it was pre-trial actually, that I took the metro down. You're running. Of course, I'm running late because that's the story of my life. And I get down there, and I kind of like I sit down in the courtroom. And I'm like, oh my God, I made it. And I look over to the side of me, and my dad goes, "Hey, Meg." I was like, "Hi, Dad." Oh,
don't worry, I got you covered, Megan.
Right, funny seeing you here. So it was sort
As
of
usual.
a fun. Obviously, he wasn't there as often as we were because he had a much larger beat, but there were a couple days where we were there together, and it just sort of made it
Yeah,
fun.
what I remember about that day too is we left the courtroom, and I said, "Hey, you want to grab lunch?" My deadline wasn't until 6:30, and she said, "Yeah, just give me a second." And she moved over to the side of the courthouse, talked into her iPhone, did a couple of movements there. And for an old guy like me, it was amazing, right? She says, "Okay, I filed." We go to my car to go to lunch, and turn on the radio, WTOP breaking news, Megan Cloherty at the courthouse. I'm like, oh my God, this business has gotten too fast for me now. It was pretty impressive.
Thank you. It took me a few years to get it down, but I appreciate that. Well, Dad, thank you for being here. You're welcome to stick around. We're going to talk about a couple more things, but I
loved it. This was great, but I'm at the beach, so much as
he
I'd
has
like
things to
say.
do. He's a retired man. He has.
I know. I mean, beach or pool, bike ride. I've got so many difficult decisions in front of me today.
Well, go enjoy yourself. Thank you for
Okay, great
joining
seeing
us.
you guys. Take care.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
It's too funny.
That's hilarious.
He just told me a couple weeks ago that he was like, oh yeah, we coordinated that, and there were a couple people who coordinated it, but I was like, what? How come you haven't mentioned it until now? All right, I'm making sure I'm logging off the correct Jack.
Can you log me off? Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Bye.
I do. See ya.
Okay. So turning back to our conversation after the ABC News audio, I recall a specific exchange with you, Jack, about during that arrest. We were writing the takedown, and I said something about, as the truck was surrounded by federal agents pointing their guns at them, Daron knew that his days of running were over. And I was like, that would be like a good ending. And you go, well, we don't know that. We don't know what he was thinking, which is true. And I'm like, come on, Jack, of course that's what he was. And he was like, no, we can't say that. And I'm bringing that up because it's not only was Jack so good at making sure that the details, I mean, I would say something like, as the sun rose on May 14th, and he was like, hold on, let me Google what time the sunrise was. He was like, nope, sun was already up. I'm like, ah. But I mean,
was it a blue backpack or a red backpack? I think that was a question.
Yeah, but the accuracy with which this story is told I'm very proud of it. And a lot of that, most of it goes back to Jack's awareness to detail. But it also brings up the issue of writing from perspective and how challenging it was in this podcast because there were so many details, there were so many voices. And as you're writing a narrative, if you think about it like you're watching a TV show, you're not hearing, it's not jumping around and you're hearing from different people in the room. You're really seeing it either from the viewer's perspective or from the perspective of one of the characters. And so when you're writing something like that, you can't jump around and it's easy to do. So Jack, can you tell us, I mean, was there a way you kind of made sure you kept that perspective?
Well, to just use your example, another that I'm thinking about was when, okay, the federal agents are surrounding them and Darren knew it was all over. And I think that, and I can't remember what we did in that situation, if we just totally removed that, but just hearing it now, I think a better way, and it fits more with the narrative, is making it a question. The agents are surrounding them. The lights are flashing. Did Darren think it was all over at this point? Because it allows you to have a voice of, you're trying to piece this together.
Yeah.
And you are, for the listener, kind of their proxy. You are leading them through this whole case. And I think that, maybe that's when we're thinking about perspective, when we try to tell different pieces of this story, I think it's episode maybe 2 and 3, which really kind of lay out the chronology of, at 6:17 p.m. this happened, at 7 p.m. this happened. And we put ourselves back in that time and what was known and what was not known. So that was, in terms of perspective, that was something that we did. We didn't. So if you go back and listen to those episodes, we used very vague words like the intruder or the person inside. We didn't try to say who it was, because at that point in time it was unknown.
Right.
So I think we tried to stick within what was known at any given point in time by who we were following through that story.
Right, because it's not like the firefighter had any idea who did this, even though at that time we knew that Darren was already charged.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So we try to stick, and that's another really great example. In the beginning, when everything is told through the perspective of the firefighter. So there's a lot of uncertainty. The room is smoky. They don't know what's there. They don't know what they're seeing. Is it a body? So we try to use that as opposed to kind of that voice of God narration. The firefighter went up the stair. He picks up a body. He didn't know it was a body at that point in time. So we tried to lean into the uncertainty of at any given moment.
And gosh, his testimony was really just so, the way he told his experience is largely how we just retold that story. He was so specific and so detailed and descriptive in how he recalled it. And I imagine it's difficult emotionally for those guys. The way you think about a story like this, talking about perspective, thinking about what Abigail and Katerina went through, thinking about what the prosecutors had to go through in knowing all of these details and trying to make a case out of them. And Jack and I spoke, and I don't want to dwell on this, but we spoke a couple times to some journalism classes and at the Investigative Reporters and Editors Conference about how this all came together. And the question we kept getting asked was, how did you emotionally deal with it? And I feel like the first time that we were asked that, I was like, huh. I hadn't thought about myself as being, I was thinking about the people who were actually involved in the case. But everybody was very interested in how, I think when you listen to something this heavy and with respect to what they went through and everything, and that we lived it and wrote about it and talked about it for however long it was, 8 months or something. Yeah. And I remember, I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot now, Jack, but I don't remember. You kind of said the way you described it, it was like we didn't check out of it. It wasn't like we were compartmentalizing it. But I think what you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, was like, if you approach it from the fact that this is in a way a public service, we want to retell these details so they're recorded, so they're out there. We went to the 6-week trial. I would report a 40-second story at the end of the day, and there was so much that didn't get in there. And so it was like kind of hanging our hat on, we want to tell how the justice system handled this case, how this went down, get all the details out. And that's sort of what brought us solace in, at the end of the day, in handling all of it. Am I recalling that correctly?
I think so. Yeah. I think, because I always struggled with, how to do it respectfully, or what's our reason for doing so. And I'm, personally, I just am almost like I'm allergic to conspiracy theories. I don't know why, I just don't. I'm a very evidence-driven person. If there's evidence of something, maybe I'll consider it, but otherwise I'm not really a speculative person. And this case had been so speculated about. And to me, the trial really answered a lot of the questions. There was a lot of things that didn't answer, which is always frustrating. But to me, I kind of thought, well, this sounds like the best version of events that we're going to get. So, and I think that some of that was kind of lost in the short form of it all. So I thought really unspooling it all and telling the long version, which isn't perfect, there's gaps, but I thought, getting that version out on the record was probably the best way to combat, the kind of the conspiracy aspect. If someone comes along with more information in the future that we never heard, maybe, maybe my mind could be changed. But yeah, I kind of came away thinking for as many gaps as there were in what we still don't know, or the things that don't make sense, the trial for me, I kind of came away thinking, yeah, I think that's about as close as we're going to get to knowing the truth of it. And I think being able to get that out there in the podcast for me kind of was answering the reason of why do a podcast.
I think too, to Megan, you asked a question, or that people asked you, like, how do you handle it? I think something that I saw from both of you too, and I said this at the beginning, is that you were both very careful about the survivors in specifically the Savopoulos family, the survivors there. And, we had conversations about, some of the things that you were exposed to in court that you saw were not things that any person should ever have to see. And we had conversations about specifically about the what happened to the victims. We had conversations about what we should share in the podcast and what we shouldn't. And I, thought that was a really important part of our process, and an important, to answer that question, how do you deal with it? Like, I feel like being able to say, we wanted to tell this story and there are reasons we were telling this story, but we did it in an ethical way. And we hope we did it in a way that for anyone listening that was personally affected by this story, that they, wouldn't be offended or wouldn't be, gosh, I don't even know what word to use.
Like feel like we made it salacious,
that it was
we were
correct.
trying to, yeah.
And so I just thought that you guys, and that came from you. You guys were you guys stood on that, and you stood in it and said, there are some facts about this that we do not want to share. We don't think they should be shared. That would make this sensational or salacious, and we don't want to do that. That's not what we're here to do.
Right.
So I think that played into it a little bit too, in terms of how you were able to cope with it, because you weren't being sensational.
I had a couple of moments. I'm not going to lie about it. When I was reading Katerina's, I think it was Katerina's
impact statement.
Yeah. I had to take multiple breaks. I had to go for walks. Because I had to deliver it emotionally and accurately, but I'm getting choked up because it was, first of all, it's very, very well written. But second of all, it's just, I can't imagine. And right. Knowing what we knew at that point toward the end of the podcast of everything that had happened. And then to hear how this woman has to go out for the rest of her life and know, it just was so heavy for me. But anyway, again, journalistically, it's who cares how we feel? But I think it's part of sort of the pulling back the veil and how we worked through all of those things to create this project. Finally, this is going to make Jack wildly uncomfortable. Is there anything, because he just said, I don't like conspiracy theories. Is there anything that you think, gosh, I would love to know this dang detail, or, the one thing that you think hangs that just bothers you? Or is it sort of it's been so many years, guys. It's fine if you're well, I've moved on. But I don't know if you have anything that when you think back at the story, there's something that still stands out.
Well, I remember saying to you guys, because obviously so much of this hung on, was this done by a single person? And could his brother have been involved? And one of the parts of the case was that, I believe he had said that, he and his brother went downtown in this van, right? And I kept thinking to myself, is there a camera that caught this van on video? There's cameras all around this city. Do we know which way they went? Could we FOIA the city to get the camera that shows either one person was in the van or there were two people in the van? And oh my gosh, wouldn't that be something? Right. And one that would what camera, what route? Like we didn't have any of, like, what were we going to do? Like FOIA every camera in the district in a, I don't know, so at some point there are certain things that you have to just cut on, right? And we're like, the chances of us being able to, like, how much time can we spend going down this path to potentially get something that we may never find it. But that is one thing to me that stands out as like and I think I said to you guys at one point too, like, well, did the prosecutors or did they try and find that, and I
good
think
memory. You're bringing that up for me. Yeah. And why they were parked, what the whole GW thing, why they were downtown, what the route was. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. And I think ultimately, maybe even one of us said something like, well, if the prosecutors or the defense attorneys didn't go after that camera footage, like what's the chances that we would be able to get it? Or what's the chances that it even exists? Because that was the other side. We didn't know if it existed.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, on the camera footage thing, it is interesting because, the crime happened in 2015. And, now, and there was traffic cameras back then, and there was traffic camera footage introduced as evidence, and that's what tracked the Porsche leaving Northwest DC and going out New York Avenue. But, I do think now, okay, and it hasn't even been, well, no, it has, this year is 10 years, but how much has changed, with home security systems, they had one, but it was kind of not a very, not necessarily advanced kind of security system. And now, with Ring doorbell cameras and all that kind of stuff, that's kind of a what if that you think about now, it's very easy to have a very secure, and that stuff saves to the cloud, and people remotely can tune in and see, so to play that kind of what if game, now somebody not even there could have tuned in and seen something strange going on, and would that have tipped things off? And, that's kind of what I think about. And it hasn't even been that long, 10 years, but certain things have really changed.
A good point. And wasn't there something about, because the Australian embassy was right across the street from the house, and there were no, and we thought, oh gosh, maybe there's camera footage there, and there was no camera footage from there either, or the direction of the camera wouldn't have extended that far. Something I vaguely remember.
Yeah. Yeah. And now, I mean, it's just, there's been a sea change. It's technologically with streaming video, and just 2015 was right on the other side of that. It just didn't, it was so, cost prohibitive. And so it's just a kind of a sad what if, that what could have happened if this were to happen in 2020, 2025.
I think that what still bothers me is, what was the plan? And was it the moment where they stepped out to get the pizza and saw that camera pointed? Is that the moment that Daron was like, this changes, now they see me?
Right.
Was it a robbery? Was it, what they say, was it a robbery gone bad? And what was did they only think were they really leaving it to Sava to determine how much money they were going to get? I keep saying they, which gives an idea too, because in my mind still, I think for me and Jack, Jack and I disagree on this, because from the beginning, like he said, the evidence only shows one person. Right. I just, from hearing what I've heard from Daron and how successful he was at adulting, how well he could sort of follow things, and it doesn't seem like he had the intellect to have put all of this together. Obviously, it went horribly wrong and horrible things happened. But the idea that he planned this is hard for me to wrap my brain around. I have no question that he was there and he was part of it. That's not a question in my mind. But I still feel like there's something that we don't know as far as.
But see, that's okay. I think that's the fundamental disagreement, because I don't think it was very well planned. I mean, to the point of the security camera footage, a more sophisticated operation would have known there was a security camera pointed at the front door well in advance. And what the prosecutor showed with the timeline is all those frantic calls to the security company happened after the pizza was delivered.
Right. Which is why, that's right. So I don't think he knew, and I wonder. I need to look back and see when those were even installed or whatever. But also the timing of it. He'd been gone from there for so many years.
Right.
Why then I mean, he wasn't familiar with that area. There's just so much of it that doesn't make sense for me still, and it won't. But I think it's fair now to look back and say, it is what it is. He did it. He's convicted. He's serving his time, and this horrible thing happened. But to know a story so well and to not acknowledge, there are gaps, like you said. I mean, there are pieces that we're just not going to know. Like if you're watching a CSI show, that all comes together, and this does not. And it's frustrating for everybody. So I think that's a good place to end it, guys. Thank you for spending time and going back into your trauma. No, I'm kidding. Going back into this story and reliving it a little bit to kind of give people an idea of how we made this happen. So thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
This podcast was originally written and produced by Jack Moore and me, Megan Cloherty, with Julia Ziegler as our content advisor. I produced the new content for 22 Hours A Second Look. Music for this episode is Haters Hate by Ramon Messam. Cast of Pods by Doug Maxwell. Beyond the Lows and Incoming Transition by The Whole Other. Available in the YouTube audio library. Rhythmic Pulse by Daniel Birch is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 International. 22 Hours A Second Look is a production of the Gamut Podcasting Network.